April 6, 2008, while on a dangerous mission deep behind enemy lines, Staff Sergeant John Wayne Walding's leg was blown off at the knee by a round from a PKM machine gun. Desperate to get home to his wife and 4 children, Walding grabbed his leg, shoved it up against his inner thigh, and used his boot laces to tie it in place. He then dragged his body down a mountainside under heavy enemy fire while continuing to return fire on the pursuing enemy force. Walding and his small team of Green Berets were now vastly outnumbered and stuck deep behind enemy lines. If Staff Sergeant Walding was ever going to see his family again, he'd have to fight like never before. The Shock Valley in Afghanistan's Nuristan province is so impenetrable that during their nearly 10-year occupation of the country, the Soviets never entered it once. And for the first 7 years of Operation Enduring Freedom, no coalition troops did either. Until the morning of April 6, 2008, when a 12-man team of U.S. Special Forces Green Berets jumped from a helicopter into the Shock Valley, becoming the first members of a foreign military to step foot on the treacherous home turf of Hezbi Islami Gulbuddin, otherwise known as HIG, the notorious military group that had controlled the valley for decades. The firefight that erupted in Shock Valley that day is one of the most harrowing battles ever waged by American operators during the war in Afghanistan. By the time the dust settled, 4 of the 12 Special Forces soldiers were critically wounded and 10 had earned silver stars for their actions that left more than 150 insurgents dead in their wake. This video is brought to you by Pentester.com, today's video sponsor, the only cybersecurity platform that reveals your entire digital footprint as it is on the dark web and automates the removal of your information as much as possible. Every time you're using a free service online, signing up for an account, or even just browsing online, your personal data is being harvested, stored, and sometimes hacked, then sold without you even realizing it. Most data removal services only scrub your information from the data brokers, but that's not enough. Your exposed data is way deeper than just that. You've got stuff like data breaches, stealer logs, social media platforms, and the typical hackers and scammers. But luckily for you, Pentester.com has the solution. They don't just remove your data, they show you everything that's exposed online first. When you use Pentester.com, you're not just buying automated removals, you're buying a full-time security solution for your entire online identity. And if you want to see your full digital footprint, you can start a free scan today at Pentester.com. Use the code in the description below to begin your protection with Pentester.com. And a huge thank you to Pentester.com for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back into it. Their mission was to capture or kill several high-ranking members of HIG, including the group's commander, but the militants were prepared for a big fight. In fact, it was later concluded that HIG had been stockpiling weapons and ammunition for a moment just like this since the Soviet-Afghan War. The Green Berets usually preferred to operate at night, but this particular mission began at daybreak. Unable to touch down on the mountain's jagged surface, the helicopter hovered about 10 feet above the ground while one by one the Green Berets leapt into an icy stream, joined by a small group of Afghan commandos. As the Americans took in their surroundings, they realized that the remote mountainside was alive with insurgent activity. And while the original plan was to fight their way down the mountain instead of up it, they also realized that the helicopter had dropped them off about 1,000 feet below a village fortified with a series of fighting positions, including mud compounds with portholes for snipers. The buildings in the village are built one on top of the other, on top of a slope thousands of feet in the air. So the Green Berets started their climb. The enemy insurgents, however, waited until the lead element was within a couple hundred meters of the compound before they initiated contact. The commandos were now completely surrounded. Bullets began whipping in from virtually every direction and with deadly accuracy. One immediately struck and killed the interpreter standing next to Walton. Another struck Staff Sergeant Dylan Bear, a communications sergeant, in the hip. Meanwhile, the lead assault force, which included Staff Sergeant David Sanders and about 10 other commandos, reached the village, where they too came under heavy fire. As reports of casualties came over the radio, Walton decided to call in close air support. He radioed to Sanders to ask him if he was too close, but Sanders simply responded, "Bring it anyway." Bombs then started exploding everywhere. Once the bombing run started to come to an end, Walton radioed Sanders again to ask if he was still alive, but all he could hear him saying was, "Hit them again." Over the course of the firefight, the Green Berets called in a total of 70 danger-close airstrikes. Several commandos were wounded by the shrapnels and debris that showered the mountainside with each explosion. But the insurgents were dug in so deeply that the airstrikes did little to stop the attack. Rocket-propelled grenades, small arms, and machine gun fire continued to rain down on the operators and their Afghan counterparts. The pilots circling above reported observing 200 armed insurgents closing in on their position. The commandos fought back with a barrage of rifle fire, rockets, and grenades, but continued to sustain casualties. Staff Sergeant John Wayne Walding's leg was blown off at the knee by a PKM machine gun round, so he quickly tied it up against his thigh with his boot laces so he wouldn't lose it in battle, and then on one leg he continued pushing down the mountain toward the evac point, killing multiple enemy fighters with his rifle on the way down. Another round glazed the helmet of the team's medic, and Master Sergeant Scott Ford, the team's sergeant, was shot twice, once through the shoulder and once in the chest. The round thankfully didn't penetrate his body armor though. With nowhere else for them to go, a triage area was quickly set up on the side of a cliff. Staff Sergeant Seth Howard was the team's weapons sergeant and a trained sniper. When the firefight began, he was further down the mountainside, and he and his element had to fight their way up. As Ford, who was bleeding profusely, began evacuating the most critically wounded soldiers, Howard took up position to cover their movement. By that point, the insurgents were so close the Americans could hear their voices, and the wounded had to be leapfrogged down the mountainside between airstrikes. Meanwhile, Howard stayed behind, picking off insurgents. Howard had less than a magazine of ammunition left when he joined his team en route to the stream, where the operation had begun 7 hours earlier. Many of the commandos had to jump off a 20-foot cliff on their way down. A medevac helicopter arrived but was only able to hover long enough to drop off a flight medic before being shot off the landing zone. On the second evacuation attempt, the bird landed in the middle of the stream, forcing the commandos to make a mad dash with the casualties through the icy water. With all the commandos now safely back on the helicopter, they made their way back to base. Miraculously, none of the Green Berets were killed during the mission. Staff Sergeant Walding received the Silver Star Medal, the Bronze Star Medal, and a Purple Heart for his actions that day. And he didn't let his injuries slow him down at all. He went on to complete Special Forces Sniper School, becoming the first amputee Green Beret sniper. He also completed several marathon runs and now runs multiple very successful businesses with his wife and 4 children. And as if all of that wasn't already crazy enough, the team's medic Ronald Schurer and Weapons Sergeant Matthew Williams were both awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions during the battle. By the end of the 7+ hour-long battle, the 12 Green Berets had eliminated more than 150 enemy insurgents without losing one American.